Salutations. Recently in my discourse with MAGA and conservatives on Truth Social, one particular conservative made an ill-fated attempt to convey me as a hypocritical grifter because back in 2015, I created a very legitimate New York history tour, twice covered by the New York Times, by the way, based on my own experience with Occupy Wall Street and how I correlated such with past labor protests and demonstrations that took place within Lower Manhattan, and of which I charged student groups $30 per student. However, let me make this absolutely clear that I never charged up front anyone affiliated with either Occupy or the anti-imperialist scene. And they do so without taking into account or even knowing why I created such an experience in the first place. To state plainly, I wasn't some random outsider who decided to create a history tour around Occupy because it was topical at the time. No, I was part of the original group that built the Occupy movement, who in tandem with others got Occupy off the ground prior to such even becoming a household term. And even prior to the first official day that the Occupy encampment came into existence on September 17, 2011. In the lead up to Occupy, first off, I wasn't part of the brain trust of college-educated trust fund types upset about student loans, and it would later become the first crop of woke SJW, AOC, and Bernie Sanders types. My introduction to the anti-imperialist activism came in late 2009 when I became involved with the Jersey City Peace Movement, which was an organic grassroots non-NPO-backed community organization dedicated to providing food and clothing for the homeless of Jersey City and dedicated to speaking out against endless wars and demanding the truth about what happened on 9/11 and speaking out against Israel's humanitarian crimes against Palestinians. I was under the tutelage of an organizer named Eric, who was essentially the right-hand man of Cindy Sheehan, who I met on a few occasions. For those unaware, Cindy Sheehan was one of the leaders of the anti-war movement during the George W. Bush era, and in 2005 attracted international press when she occupied Crawford, Texas, disrupting W's summer vacation to protest the Iraq War after her son Casey was killed. Cindy Sheehan's act would subsequently put millions of asses in the streets in protest of the Iraq War and the War on Terror. I regard Cindy and Eric as mentors of mine. Before I was involved with Occupy, I was helping Eric to organize protests and demonstrations in New York relative to condemning the genocide that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton committed in Libya. My roots doing activist stuff come from the anti-war movement. They're not from the woke progressive scene, as some of my detractors mistakenly believe. Anyhow, in the build-up to Occupy, I was involved with doing outreach, going to poetry cafes, community centers like Action 21 in Jersey City, promoting the action on September 17, 2011, as well as doing online outreach to the point where I was spamming Facebook 15 hours a day with Occupy memes. I was at Zuccotti Park, alternatively termed Liberty Square, where I'm sitting right now, by the way, nearly every day and every night. At the time, only operating on 3 to 4 hours of sleep a day and occasionally going home to shower. I knew and still know most of the people who ran the working groups at the Liberty Square encampment: finance, library, media, sanitation, kitchen, alternative currency, visions and goals, and direct action. Speaking for myself, I was involved with overnight security with a guy named Casper during my off days when I was not working my legitimate overnight job. Yeah, I had a job. Even when people told me to go get a job, I still had a job during Occupy Wall Street. And I was also loosely involved with the media team disseminating photo and video footage of the day-to-day events around Liberty Square and with people all across the country. I was marching in those streets yelling all day, all week, Occupy Wall Street. And austerity, no thanks, torch down the banks. Protesting JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Monsanto, Disney, and Big Pharma. Doesn't that sound familiar? I had pepper spray streams shot at me. I inhaled tear gas. I dodged flashbang grenades at the more serious demonstrations. I got kicked in the head by a police officer. I got arrested twice, the first time on the Brooklyn Bridge and the second time in San Francisco. I fully took on the 99% versus 1% mission of the original Occupy movement before the movement was suppressed and later commandeered by Bernie, AOC, DSA, and the DNC to suit their agenda and not the agenda of the 99%. So, the reason why I created an Occupy Wall Street history tour in 2015 was because A, being a movement insider, I was the right person to create such an experience. B, I was also qualified to do such. In order to become a tour guide in New York, one has to pass a 150-question exam as mandated by the city relative to the city's institutional history, the history of the city's various neighborhoods, geography, culture, and even traffic patterns. I have close to 30,000 hours worth of research time under my belt and scored 137 out of 150 to earn my license on July 24th, 2013. At first, I was hesitant to create a tour based around Occupy and waited 2 years before launching the project. In early 2015, I began to sense the corporatization of social justice and also being wholly aware of tour guides capitalizing off the 9/11 memorial. I grew apprehensive to the idea of tour guides getting the same idea as it pertained to Occupy, without having been there, without knowing the ins and outs of what really happened here. So, being a local historian, officially licensed and trained to conduct tours in New York, and desiring to protect the narrative of Occupy from outsiders who were not directly involved, I pulled everyone I knew from Liberty Square, from homeless street activists to the brain trust of college-educated trust fund types running OccupyWallStreet.org, and was unanimously given the green light to go forward with the project. That's why I created that tour. Now, on to the next subject. Being criticized by snide-ass libertarians and far-right reactionaries for charging university groups $30 to go on a tour to learn about a movement from a movement insider who played a role in building that movement and who just so happens to be an urban historian with 30,000 hours worth of research time relevant to New York City and who is licensed by the city to conduct history tours. What do they want me to do? Work for free? Then they will snidely say something to the extent, well, that makes you a capitalist, capitalizing off an anti-capitalist movement. Okay, when it comes to the Occupy tour, I don't have employees. I work for myself. I'm not making a profit from another person doing the tour for me. I own the modes and means of my own production relative to conveying the true real life story on the ground here in Zuccotti Park about a movement that I literally played a role in building. This isn't the Waltons, this isn't Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates, this is an anti-war, anti-imperialist street activist getting paid for the time to inform student groups about lived history from a first-person perspective, in addition to learning about other people's movements relevant to New York history, as related to early 18th century slave revolts, the American Revolution against the Crown, early 20th century IWW demonstrations, anti-Vietnam War protests, the 1970s feminist movement fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment, and AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, Act Up, protesting the Reagan administration's negligence to handle the AIDS crisis. Next, the Occupy Wall Street tour was not created for tourists, but for university groups. I've had university groups from the University of London, Royal Holloway, Syracuse, Yale, Columbia, Parsons New School, the University of Munster, Germany, the University of Montreal, and I even had an Oxford professor on my tour. Okay? What do these libertarians and far-right people want me to do? Work for nothing? You know what that's called? It's called slavery. And I know far-right reactionaries and libertarians have a soft spot for the institution of slavery, don't they? Because they are a bunch of Lincoln haters, after all. Well, I'm not going to be a slave for the college industrial complex. No, I'm going to charge them, and I'm going to get paid for my own time, absent of exploiting another person to work on my behalf. Does that make me a capitalist to an extent? Yeah, it probably does, but that makes me ethically capitalist, because when it comes to that particular tour, I'm literally working for myself. Nobody is working for me. To state again, as I said in the beginning, I do not believe in charging upfront fees for anyone who I was affiliated with as it relates to our shared time running day-to-day operations here in Liberty Square when the encampment was up and running in the autumn of 2011, should they request to go on an Occupy tour. Nor do I charge any upfront fees to any personality or organizer related to the anti-imperialist movement. It's a pay-what-you-wish type of ordeal, if they should so choose to pay me. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I've given plenty of freebie tours to locals and even homeless people who are genuinely interested in learning about Occupy and the radical working class history of New York City. Jian Zhu has been on my tour, and he can most certainly vouch for me that I am indeed the real deal when it comes to providing an authentic radical history tour of New York City, which just so happens to incorporate my time with Occupy Wall Street. So in closing, it isn't really wise to make something appear like one thing when it really isn't. In fact, it's very disingenuous. Yes, I am the de facto historian of the Occupy Wall Street movement as it relates exclusively to New York. Yes, I do charge student groups to go on an educational tour to learn about a movement prior to earning my license to conduct historical tours in New York. As a legitimate anti-war activist from the Cindy Sheehan school of thought, which I had a literal hand in helping to build, and which I was intimately involved with relative to its day-to-day operations. To reiterate, I did such to protect the integrity of the movement on the street level, and to prevent floozy, excessively studious woke liberal types who were not involved with the day-to-day operations of the Liberty Square encampment from capitalizing off a movement they knew absolutely nothing about other than what they saw on Jon Stewart or heard on NPR or what Noam Chomsky conveyed to them. Yeah, I plead guilty. If someone has a problem with that, then that's too fucking bad. Despite what Occupy would later become after it was co-opted by Bernie, AOC, the DSA, and the DNC, I have no shame in saying that I was one of the foundational members of the original Occupy movement. I have no shame in being one of the individuals responsible for a brief moment in time in getting the public's attention off of the culture war, as some of you knucklehead tankies say, to get the public focused on the abuses of corporate power, special interest groups, and the military-industrial complex. I still uphold the 99% versus 1% mission of the original Occupy movement. And despite being slightly more conservative, but not so conservative to be considered right-wing, as I am socially a moderate, than when I was in my 20s, that is a mission I will carry to my grave. You want to think what you will, then you go ahead and think what you will. But folks should at least know my side of the story before they go around spouting things on matters they know very little about. That is all. God save our American state. This is Comrade Pella signing out.